Music of the Soul, Prelude. Chapter 1. Why not tell me now? Krista demanded. She was terrified. She was almost certain she had come within a hair's breadth of losing her soul just a moment ago, and the general weakness and cold that she felt down to her bones was evidence enough of that. Because there are too many eyes and ears around us, even if they are occupied with running right now, the young man told her, his boyish grin fading into deadly seriousness. What you did just now wasn't the best way to hide yourself or keep yourself safe, you know. People are going to be asking questions in just a few minutes, if they aren't already. Those who were not here to watch you but saw what you did. What were you thinking? I wasn't, Krista began. That much is obvious. You can explain yourself on the way back. Can you walk? He said with a snappish tone. In spite of his earlier smile, he did not seem best pleased at what she had just done, whatever that had been. I don't know, she said with some hesitation. Her legs felt like pudding, as did her arms and everything else, and she was beginning to shiver fiercely. Try, he said sternly. We have to get out of here. My grandfather and brother are parked on the side of the road over there, Krista said, indicating with her head toward a deep green truck just a short distance away from the sand where the grass ended and the beach began. An errant breeze wafted by as she did so, blowing a few strands of hair into her face. At least this time it was a natural breeze that happened almost constantly on the coast. Sorry to tell you, kid, but we aren't going to them. You're coming with me, the young man said, with an air of authority that would have none of her nonsense right now. Why should I do that? Krista asked. I don't even know who you are. Because you're a danger to yourself and others right now, the young man said impatiently, wrapping her right arm around the back of his neck and supporting her left side with his left arm as he stood, supporting her weight. It seemed he was going to lead her away whether or not she could walk on her own. She tried to protest, but she still felt too weak and cold and surprised at how little help she could provide in standing on her own. The name's Neil, by the way. Yours? Krista, she said, a bit more tartly than she normally would have permitted out of herself, but she did not like being led away like a child, nor did she like being told she was going with him whether or not she wanted to. What gives you the right to take me away? The fact that you almost killed yourself and everyone else around you just now, he said flatly. Well, she supposed he had a point there, but it wasn't as if she had done it intentionally, nor did she intend to try anything like that again. I don't even know how or why I did that. What makes you think I'm going to try again? She demanded. Because you won't be able to stop, he said grimly, as he began to lead her across the soft sand of the beach, away from the icy waters of the ocean, towards the verdant patches of tall grass that grew here and there along the side of the slate-gray, ill-mended road. There, she could see just a few paces behind her grandfather's truck was a smaller, deep blue vehicle, an older model with 2 front doors, but no back doors in spite of having back seats. Their steps through the sand, soft as they were and muffled, suddenly sounded loud in her ears, as did the whistle of the breeze through the few scattered trees on the other side of the road. And what makes you think that? Krista asked, trying her best to support as much of her own weight as she could. She didn't want him to think she was too weak to fend for herself if she needed to. He could take advantage of that after all. Look, are you going to ask questions all day, or are you going to do the smart thing and come with me? He demanded, turning his head to look at her with those deep blue eyes, causing her to jerk back in surprise. Those eyes were angry, nearly to the point of violence. She knew that kind of look all too well, and suddenly she was unsure if it was to anger him any further. He didn't look like the kind of person to physically fight someone who disagreed with him, but looking into those azure eyes, fiery with anger, she was not so sure. "I'll explain on the way if you can stay awake long enough. You look like you're about to pass out right now as it is, and it's no wonder." There must have been something in the look on her face, because he turned his head back to looking where they were going, and his tone had gentled a bit. It still brooked no nonsense, but it was less like a shout and more like stern advice. Besides, he was right, though she hated admitting it, even to herself. She did feel exhausted, like she could sleep a week, or at least a day or two. Just what had she done to herself, and why had it happened now? "My brother and Grandpa," she tried to protest, but it sounded weak. Well, she felt weak. "We'll send someone to them to explain a few things," he told her, this time more gently than before. "I can't keep them from seeing me drag you to my car, and even if I could, they would still worry about why you never came back. That's your concern, correct? They deserve some answers, but they won't be the answers you receive. Keep this in mind from now on. No one must know what you can do." "That much is obvious," she muttered, more to herself. She had seen the looks on people's faces as they fled the beach after her little stunt. They'd been terrified. What would they do to someone like her, to someone who could wield such power? What would they do out of sheer terror or religious belief that she must be some sort of demon or possessed by a demon to do such powerful things? "Oh, good. You do use your brain. You had me worried for a moment," he snapped at her. "No need to be rude," she snapped back. She could understand him being upset. She was upset herself, and still terrified of what she had done, of what she could do, of whatever it was that she is. But she was growing tired of his peevishness. For a moment, neither of them said anything as they walked slowly, almost comically so, considering the last few beachgoers who had seen her were still running in panic towards their cars. Her knees about to fold under her in a moment if she didn't concentrate so hard on staying upright. Her head was beginning to hurt and feel stuffed full of cotton right about now. Her eyes were so heavy it was a wonder she could keep them open. However, she could feel his broad shoulders slump a little beneath her arm, and though it was almost whipped away by the coastal breeze, she could hear him give a little sigh before adjusting her weight across his shoulders. "You're right," he said finally, as the sand slowly became clumps of shining grass whipping in the breeze. "I apologize. Pissed as I am that you would be so stupidly obvious, you obviously didn't know what you were doing, nor did you have any control of yourself until that last moment, which frankly is impressive. Most people who have not been guided or trained don't stop themselves when they first discover what they can do and end up dying because of it. You felt it, didn't you? Like your soul was about to be ripped from your body? You must be pretty scared right now, too." "Yeah, I am," she said quietly. She hadn't wanted to admit it, but at least some of her shivering wasn't because she was cold. "I don't even know how I stopped myself or why." This time he blinked at her in surprise as they approached his little blue car. He leaned her up against it as he fished his keys from his capacious hip pocket, a simple ring with 2 silvery keys on it, one longer than the other. "I can understand wanting the thrill of the power you just wielded," he said as he unlocked the passenger door and opened it for her. "But most people want to stop when they feel their soul beginning to separate like that." "It's a long story," she said, taking a step forward towards the open door, and surprised that she didn't fall, though most of her weight was leaning against the car still. Her legs still felt unsteady, and she was unsure she could sit down on the canvas seat without falling. One I don't really want to tell right now. Fair enough, he said slowly, after a moment's hesitation. His expression softened in some ways, and in others hardened. But he did not press the matter, not right away, and instead focused on easing her into the passenger seat. At least she was able to swing her own legs into the car unaided. As soon as she was safely in his car, which seemed far warmer on the inside than the current weather outside the car, exhaustion hit her like a sack of bricks. She was barely aware of Neil buckling her in or of the sound of the passenger door closing. She had begun to drift when she heard the driver's side door open and close a moment later, waking her a little. A dim, distant thought found it odd that the car was so warm for such a cool day, and that the car had not started almost immediately after the driver's side had closed. But it was a thought she could not latch onto very well. She had a vague feeling she was being watched, but her eyes were too heavy to open, and she once again began to drift as a warm, gentle breeze hit her face. She found that odd for a moment, too, but couldn't place why it was odd, nor did she care. The warmth felt good to her nearly frozen body and further relaxed her into sleep.